Hi everyone, welcome to week 10 of Lit 215. We are finishing internment this week, and I will kind of warn you, the end of the book is really intense, so I do recommend kind of taking your time with it. Try not to rush, maybe take breaks if you need to. There's a lot that happens in a very short amount of time. I hope you are staying warm as we're getting into the sort of winter, fallish season, and let's go ahead and get started with this week. So, assignments this week, pretty straightforward. Reading quiz 10, discussion board 10. We're really just focusing on finishing up internment, and I'd like to, just get your thoughts on this last section of the novel and Muslim American literature in general, sort of just what you've gotten from the book. We are gonna start a new book next week, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Plus, work on a major assignment next week, which is the literary critique. So I am going to give you the info for that assignment this week, just so you can kind of be thinking about it and get kind of prepared for that assignment. So let's dive into internment this week. I really like this quote here at the beginning of, I think it's chapter 26, the beginning of this section. Layla is sort of reflecting on this experience and how she kind of can't sleep and can't rest, and she's kind of thinking about, like, when this is all over, what does that look like? And she says there's not even a real war, not like World War II. I think she's referring back to Japanese internment, and she says it's all terrorist attacks and retaliation and enemies without borders. There could be no end. And I think this is definitely part of that post 9/11 literature. We read a piece on this at the very beginning of our course, but the idea that there's this focus on chaos and just trying to make sense of events that we don't really understand. So I encourage you all to kind of note where you see that in this text. Throughout this section, I'm going to try really hard not to give you any spoilers, so I'm being very vague, but we definitely also see in chapter 26 Layla and Jake have a significant conversation about what it means to find your true north and why he has a compass tattoo on him. And I think this is sort of an interesting perspective. Also, how has age been protecting Layla up to this point? And how does it start to not matter in this section? And you might think about that as well in relation to the other articles I'm having you guys read this week. I think when it comes to people who are being demonized, particularly by members of authority, we sort of depict them as adults with adult motives. But Layla herself is not even 18, and she's really still, in a lot of ways, a child. So, how do those rules about how we treat children versus adults get sort of mixed in this situation? They do have this protest at the fence where they all stand in front of the fence and raise their fists in solidarity. And so how do those inside and outside the camp react to this? It's not the last sort of act of resistance, but it's one of the most significant. We do see Sohail return to the camp, and this is a very sort of bittersweet moment. And like I said, some intensity there. Layla and the director finally come head to head. They've sort of been moving towards this climax. I think it's one of the big climaxes of the novel. We also see more of Jake and Fred, Jake's friends, and I'm interested to see what you all think about their roles and how they're changing. So how, as things kind of ramp up in the camp, are Jake and Fred reacting differently and sort of taking more responsibility for themselves as agents in this event? Pay attention to how Layla and her family are treated by the director. Where is that treatment coming from, and why does it happen? I think that a lot of, in times of quote unquote war, and the camp has technically been declared a war zone, how are things that probably wouldn't happen or wouldn't be acceptable otherwise, why do they become acceptable in times of war? And then also, after the end, think about recovery, the aftermath of this. Can we forgive and forget what's happened? Should we? And I know that this is a fictional piece, right? But I think what Samira Ahmed is really trying to get across with her novel is that this could happen. She says it's placed 15 minutes in the future of where America is. And I think that's significant because the scary thing is that it's definitely possible, that it's happened before, and how do we prevent it from happening again? How do we learn from this past that we have and move forward from it without forgetting it? I think that's kind of maybe the overall point. So like I said, I'm going to try not to give any spoilers. The end of the book is really intense, so I'm looking forward to your guys' thoughts on it. The other readings I'm having you all read this week are 2 articles, one by NPR and the other by the Associated Press, about immigration and detention centers in the U.S. So some questions to think about. Although internment is about American citizens who are being interned, which is its own kind of betrayal, what Samira Ahmed did with this book, and you see this if you read the author's note at the end, is she's kind of basing this on events that have actually happened in the US, particularly regarding our immigration policy. So some ideas to consider while you're reading these news articles is how can immigration policy impact how Americans themselves are treated? If we demonize... Sorry, that was my dog. If we demonize certain groups of people, how do those lines become blurred between this is an outsider to our country and this is someone who is from here? And, how do those start to mix together? What conditions do immigrants describe in these detention facilities or at the border? And did you learn anything that sort of reinforced, extended, or challenged what you already knew? So I think we've heard about immigration detention. We've heard about these fights at the border. We've heard about talk of a wall, of shutting the U.S. off from people seeking asylum. But did you learn anything that sort of extended that base knowledge? What kind of emotions did reading these perspectives raise for you? I don't think that there is any one right answer, and I'm not saying that politically one person or thing is right and the other is wrong. What I want you to do is kind of decide for yourself, how do you feel about it and why? And what experience is that based on? Then, what do you think about the ethics of migration and migrant detention after reading these different perspectives? So I know, like I said, that we all have very strong feelings about immigration in the US, particularly because we ourselves as a country have a lot of sort of humanitarian crises that we deal with, and I think people are afraid of immigrants from other areas complicating those crises. And there really, like I said, is no one right answer. But the reality is that we have immigrants from all over the world coming to the US, and certain groups of them are treated differently than others, and that's facts. So how do, reading perspectives of those in these detention centers kind of make you think? And then finally, what can you do as a citizen, as a person, to help ensure that migrants are treated humanely where you're from and also on the border? I think that's sort of Samira Ahmed's whole point. How can we as average people impact the treatment of those around us? And I think that's really the whole point. So, some interesting questions to think about, and feel free to discuss these in our discussion board as well. Last thing I wanted to touch on, our week 11 major assignment is a literary critique. So this is not due this week, it is due next week, but I posted the assignment sheet just so you can get thinking about the assignment. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose a piece of literature you found for your project. Make sure it is a piece of literature, not one of the academic sources, all right? This should be a 3-page critique, and it's going to be broken down into 4 parts. I'm going to post examples for y'all to look at, but basically what you're going to do is first summarize the piece. In general, what's it about? You're next going to evaluate it. You're going to tell me what's good about it, what's bad about it, what can you challenge. Then you're going to discuss who the author is and why it was published where it was. How does that kind of impact the piece? So, for example, if I was critiquing internment, then I might talk about who Samira Ahmed is, when this book was published, how that influences its reception. And then you're going to have a reference page in MLA. Pretty straightforward. So the critique is really just a way to kind of dive into one of the pieces you've chosen. And we won't do a critique of every piece you have, but I think thinking about your pieces in this way can really inform your literary project. So look over the assignment sheet this week, and we will work on typing these next week. And finally, make sure that you get a copy of In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, because this is our next peek into multicultural literature. We'll be looking at Hispanic American literature, Latin American literature, particularly literature from people who have a basis in Hispanic culture. So I am really excited to also introduce this book to you all. And it's different from the others we've read so far, but I think that's also good. I'm excited to see what you all think. So make sure you have a copy of it before next week, because we will hit the ground running. And we have just this book and one more until we are finished with the semester, which is just insane. I mean, we're just trucking along. So I'm interested to see how you all do with internment, and I will talk to you online.